You didn't become easy to love because you were low maintenance. You became easy to love because you learned how to disappear quietly. You learned how to be agreeable before you learned how to be safe. You learned how to adapt before you learned how to be met. And people praised you for it. They said you were calm, understanding, mature. What they meant was, you didn't ask much. You didn't disrupt the dynamic. You didn't demand repair. You didn't require depth. You learned that love stayed. When you stayed easy, that's where it started. Not with weakness, with intelligence. You noticed early. That tension made people pull away. So you softened yourself. Before anyone had to ask, you read the room, adjusted your tone, lowered your needs. You learned how to make connection feel effortless for others. But it wasn't effortless for you. It cost you something. Every time you swallowed a reaction, every time you said, "It's fine," when your body said, "It's not." Every time you gave empathy, instead of asking for accountability. Every time you made sense of behavior that hurt you. Being easy to love didn't come from abundance. It came from self-monitoring, from tracking moods, energy shifts, unspoken rules. You weren't relaxed in love. You were vigilant. And vigilance looks calm on the outside. But inside, your nervous system was working overtime. This is the part no one names. Being easy to love often means you're doing emotional labor no one sees. You're anticipating disappointment before it arrives. You're cushioning other people from your truth. You're making relationships feel smooth by absorbing the friction yourself. That's not emotional maturity. That's emotional compression. And over time, compression has a cost. You start feeling tired for no obvious reason. You start feeling disconnected, even when you're close to someone. You start feeling lonely inside relationships that look fine from the outside. Because ease without reciprocity isn't intimacy, it's accommodation. And accommodation requires you to stay smaller than your full emotional range. You stop naming things as they happen. You wait until it's worth bringing up. You wait until you can say it perfectly. You wait until it won't inconvenience anyone. And by the time you speak, the moment has passed. Your body remembers, though. It remembers every time. You chose harmony over honesty. Every time you regulated everyone else while dysregulating yourself. That's the psychological cost. Not heartbreak, not rejection, but self-abandonment. That happens quietly. Over time, you didn't do this because you lacked boundaries. You did it because connection once felt conditional. Because you learned that being too much led to distance. So you became less, not less loving, less visible, less expressive, less real, in moments that mattered. And here's the truth. That's hard to sit with. People who benefit from you being easy rarely ask what it costs you. They enjoy the smoothness, the flexibility, the lack of friction, but they don't see the internal negotiation that makes it possible. That's why being easy to love often attracts people who don't want to grow, because growth requires tension, and you learned how to remove tension before it could ask anything of them. This isn't blame, it's clarity, because once you see this, something begins to shift. You stop romanticizing ease. You stop equating love with effortlessness. You start noticing how safety feels different from silence, how regulation feels different from suppression, how being held feels different from being tolerated. This is where the work begins, not by becoming harder, but by becoming honest, without apology, by letting connection include discomfort instead of avoiding it, by allowing yourself to take up emotional space without managing the outcome. Being easy to love was never your superpower. Your depth was. You just learned to hide it, to keep connection. And now you're learning. You don't have to anymore. You didn't become easy to love by accident. You learned it. You learned that harmony kept you safe, that being agreeable kept tension away, that reading the room was more reliable than being read. So you adapted, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You learned to anticipate before asking, to soften before expressing, to manage before feeling. And slowly, your nervous system confused being needed with being valued. This is where the psychological cost begins. Because being easy to love often means being hard to know, not because you're secretive, but because you learned to edit yourself before anyone else had to. You became efficient at connection, low friction, low maintenance, high emotional output. You brought calm. You brought understanding. You brought reassurance before it was requested. And people loved that. But your body didn't. Your body learned. That closeness required self-monitoring. That love came with conditions you had to enforce on yourself. Don't need too much. Don't feel too deeply. Don't ask too often. And over time, this creates a subtle split. The version of you that is relationally successful and the version of you that is emotionally tired. You may not have noticed it at first because you weren't unhappy. You were functional. You were chosen. You were appreciated. But something felt thin. Connection without depth. Affection without attunement. Closeness without being met. This is the cost of being easy to love. You become someone who is rarely disappointed out loud, but often lonely internally, because your needs were never denied. They were just never expressed fully. And that matters. Psychologically, when a woman consistently prioritizes emotional ease over emotional truth, her system learns to downregulate desire, not because she wants less, but because wanting became unsafe. Wanting risked disruption, wanting risked rejection, wanting risked being too much. So instead, your system chose predictability. You learned to attach through reliability instead of reciprocity, to bond through giving instead of receiving. And this creates a dynamic where others feel comfortable, but you feel unseen, not ignored, unseen, because being easy to love often attracts people who enjoy access without depth, people who benefit from your regulation but don't offer their own, people who feel close to you without truly showing up for you. And none of this means they're villains, but it does mean the dynamic was built on your self-suppression, and your body keeps score. You may notice it as fatigue, as emotional flatness, as irritation that feels out of proportion, as a sudden desire for space. You can't quite explain. That's not you becoming avoidant. That's your system requesting equity, because being easy to love often means you carried more than your share. You held emotional continuity. You remembered details. You smoothed ruptures. You kept things going. And eventually, your system asks the question you avoided for years: who is holding me? This is where awareness begins. Not with blame, not with regret, but with clarity. You didn't fail at love. You survived it by becoming efficient. And now, your body is ready for something different. Not louder, not harder, just truer. This is the moment many women misinterpret as detachment, but it's actually discernment forming. Your system is no longer willing to exchange ease for erasure. You're not asking for more. You're allowing yourself to need without apology. And that's the beginning of emotional maturity. Not being harder to love, but refusing to disappear, to be loved at all. Being easy to love didn't start as a flaw. It started as intelligence. You learn how to read rooms. Before you learn how to rest, you learn how to soften. Before you learn how to ask, you learn how to adapt. Before you learn how to stay. This wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And at first, it worked. People felt comfortable with you, safe with you, seen by you. You became the place. Others exhaled, but no one asked. Where you exhaled, and slowly, your nervous system learned that love meant regulation for others, not co-regulation, not mutuality, just you holding steady, so someone else wouldn't fall apart. This is the quiet psychological cost. When you're easy to love, you don't get met. You get used, not maliciously, but habitually. People begin to expect your flexibility, your understanding, your forgiveness, before repair, your presence, without reciprocity. And because you don't demand chaos, they assume you don't need care. This is where self-abandonment becomes invisible. You're still functioning, still kind, still giving, but something inside you is constantly bracing, monitoring tone, anticipating disappointment, adjusting expectations before they're even voiced. Your body knows before your mind does. It knows you're holding more than your share. It knows you're overfunctioning emotionally. It knows you're staying regulated so someone else doesn't have to grow. And that's exhausting. Not the dramatic kind, the slow kind, the kind that dulls desire, the kind that makes you question why connection feels lonely, the kind that makes you wonder if love is supposed to feel this heavy. This is why easy to love women often feel invisible. They don't create friction. They don't demand expansion. They don't force truth. So partners don't have to confront themselves. And over time, you start confusing peace with absence. You start mistaking silence for safety. You start shrinking needs before they reach your mouth, not because you don't have them, but because you've learned they won't be held. This is the psychological erosion, not heartbreak, not betrayal, but gradual self-loss. You don't feel chosen. You feel tolerated, appreciated, but not pursued, valued, but not prioritized. And the most painful part? You're praised for it. You're so understanding. You're so easy. You're not like other women. What they're really saying is, you make it easy for me to stay the same. And eventually, your system resists. Not loudly, but subtly. You feel numb, where you used to feel warm. Detached, where you used to lean in. Less available, not because you're cold, but because your body is protecting you. This is not you becoming distant. This is you becoming aware. And awareness is where the shift begins. Not by becoming harder, but by becoming truer. By letting yourself be seen, even if it disrupts comfort. By allowing needs to exist without apology. By choosing resonance over accommodation. Because real love doesn't require you to disappear quietly, to keep it alive. And your system knows that now. At some point, being easy to love stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like erasure. Not because you changed, but because your body did. It got tired of being convenient, of being agreeable when something felt off, of smoothing discomfort that wasn't yours to hold, of being praised for how little you needed. That praise was never safety. It was relief. Relief that no one had to stretch, adjust, or show up fully. When you're easy to love, you rarely get to be deeply known because depth requires friction, and friction was something you learned to avoid early, not consciously. Nervously, your system learned that harmony kept you connected, that making things easier kept you included, that being low maintenance kept you chosen. So you became adaptable. You anticipated moods, softened your needs, lowered your volume, and it worked until it didn't, because eventually your body started asking for reciprocity. And the moment it did, the dynamic cracked. You weren't difficult. You were no longer disappearing. This is the psychological cost no one talks about. Being easy to love trains you to tolerate emotional imbalance. You learn to feel guilty for needing. You learn to second guess your reactions. You learn to self-soothe instead of being soothed. And over time, you forget what mutual effort feels like. You mistake comfort for closeness. You mistake peacekeeping for intimacy. You mistake silence for stability until your nervous system refuses to cooperate. You start feeling restless in relationships that look fine. You feel lonely next to people who say they care. You feel unseen, even when you're appreciated. That's not ingratitude. That's awareness. This is where emotional maturity quietly arrives, not as confrontation, but as clarity. You stop explaining why you need more. You stop packaging your needs to be digestible. You stop shrinking to remain lovable. And something interesting happens. The right people don't experience this shift as loss. They experience it as relief because they no longer have to guess what's happening inside you. They don't benefit from your self-silencing. They meet you. The ones who disappear were never responding to you. They were responding to how easy you were to manage. And that's the line that matters. You didn't lose connection when you stopped being easy. You lost access to dynamics that required your self-abandonment. That's not a failure. That's discernment. And discernment doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calm. You're not harder to love now. You're just no longer available for relationships that depend on you being smaller. If this landed quietly, not urgently, that's your body recognizing truth. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything. Just don't unlearn what you finally felt. That's where your power lives.